I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at Seymour Hirsch and his bombshell story on Biden ordering the destruction of the Nord Streams and how that was accomplished. And then I'm going to tie that in with some episodes that I did a year ago on Michael Hudson and his prediction that this will be the third time in a century that Germany has been defeated. Recently, there's been the bomb train that hit East Palestine, Ohio. But here in Northern California, we're recovering from a month of bomb rains in the curiously named bomb cyclone. But still, houses haven't been rebuilt from the CZU lightning fires from 2 years ago. So here by the ocean, where we have neither lightning nor cyclones, I'm going to look at all those things and whether there's a 3D reset: depopulation, dispossession, and destruction. And then I'm going to tie that all together with the excellent movie Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, and the Bagel of Doom. Let's do this. Although it's not a surprise to anyone with a lick of sense, Seymour Hirsch has confirmed the obvious. Russia did not blow up its own pipeline. He's done this through 3 months of investigative journalism and broken the scoop on Substack. He uses an anonymous source, which means that mainstream media doesn't have a person to discredit, only the concept of an anonymous source, which Glenn Greenwald has done an excellent job of showing that investigative journalism always relies on. They think in the mainstream that we should only rely on government paychecks that go between those and lucrative media positions, because those official sources are the only ones that we should trust. Instead, Hirsch has done what everyone does with an anonymous source, is that they show that there's internal credibility with both the consistency of the story and also how it jives with the facts that are known. And Hirsch does an excellent job of showing things that no one who was just an outsider could possibly know, and a narrative that fits all the things that are just mysteries to the mainstream. So the easy part is dismissing what he said, but the hard part that no one else is doing is coming up with an alternative narrative that makes sense. In an episode from last March called Putin's Peace, Petrodollar Pain, I quote leading geopolitical economist Michael Hudson. He writes, "So what you're seeing is not the U.S. backfiring and shooting it in their foot by creating a world crisis. That's the idea. Because it realizes that in the world crisis, energy prices are going to go way up, benefiting the U.S. balance of payments. Not only as an energy exporter, but the oil companies that control the world oil trade, once they exclude Russia from it, agricultural crop prices will go way up, benefiting the United States as an agricultural exporter, especially if they prevent Ukrainian and Russian wheat exports. And this is going to create a debt crisis for third world countries whose debts are coming due. And the United States can use this debt crisis to force them, or attempt to force them, if they go along with it, to continue privatizing and selling off their public domain to U.S. buyers, so they can sell off their patrimony in order to get the money to pay the debts to pay for the higher oil and food imports. The U.S. strategy is to create exactly the world crisis that you are presented with as being accidental. Look at what they're doing as deliberate. Don't assume they're dumb. They're smart. They're evil, but they're not dumb. Certainly, it's going to cause suffering in the short term for these countries. Over the longer term, we're going to have to become self-sufficient in the main pressure points. We're going to have to produce our own food, not import our wheat. We're going to have to shift away from growing export plantation crops and have our own grain, maybe return to family-sized farming to do all this. We're going to have to produce our own arms. We're going to have our own fuel sources, and that would include solar energy and renewable energy to become independent of the American-dominated oil and gas and coal trade. So the longer-term, even medium-term effects of all this is going to make other countries self-sufficient and independent. There will be a lot of interruptions, even starvation, a lot of property transfers and disruption. But over the long term, the U.S. is destroying the idea of a single interconnected globalized order because it's separated Europe and North America from the whole rest of the world. Neoliberalism impoverishes. Neoliberalism is a class war against labor by finance, primarily, and a class war against industry, a class war against governments. It's the financial class really against the whole rest of society, seeking to use debt leverage to control companies, countries, families, and individuals by debt. In a February 2022 episode called Theodicy, Hegemony, and Michael Hudson on Ukraine, I quote from his article, which is America Defeats Germany for the Third Time in a Century. And I think there is no one who is more prescient than Hudson when it comes to putting these pieces together and having his finger on the pulse of what's really going on. I quote from him in my book on the FIRE sector, which is finance, insurance, and real estate. He writes, internationally, the FIRE sector's aim is to privatize foreign economies, above all, to secure the privilege of credit creation in U.S. banks, very important, so as to turn government infrastructure and public utilities into rent-seeking monopolies to provide basic services such as healthcare, education, transportation, communications, and information technology at maximum prices instead of at subsidized prices to reduce the cost of living and doing business. President Biden has been demanding for over a year that Germany prevent the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from supplying its industry and housing with low-priced gas and turn to the much higher-priced U.S. suppliers. And remember, this was already a year ago. U.S. officials first tried to stop construction of the pipeline from being completed. Firms aiding in its construction were sanctioned. But finally, Russia itself completed the pipeline. U.S. pressure then turned to the traditionally pliant German politicians, claiming that Germany and the rest of Europe faced a national security threat from Russia turning off the gas, presumably to extract some political or economic concessions. No specific Russian demands could be thought up, and so their nature was left obscure and blob-like. Germany refused to authorize the Nord Stream 2 from officially going into operation. A major aim of today's new Cold War is to monopolize the market for U.S. shipments of liquefied natural gas, LNG. Already under Donald Trump's administration, Angela Merkel was bullied into promising to spend $1 billion building new port facilities for U.S. tanker ships to unload natural gas for German use. The Democratic election victory in November 2020, followed by Ms. Merkel's retirement from Germany's political scene, led to cancellation of this port investment. This left Germany without much alternative to importing Russian gas to heat its homes, power its electric utilities, and to provide raw material for its fertilizer industry and hence the maintenance of its farm productivity. So the most pressing U.S. strategic aim of NATO confrontation with Russia is soaring oil and gas prices, above all to the detriment of Germany. In addition to creating profits and stock market gains for U.S. oil companies, higher energy prices will take much of the steam out of the German economy. Thus looms the third time in a century that the U.S. will have defeated Germany, each time increasing its control over a German economy increasingly dependent on the U.S. for imports and policy leadership, with NATO being the effective check against any domestic nationalist resistance. Higher gasoline, heating, and other energy prices also will hurt U.S. consumers and those of other nations, especially Global South energy-deficient economies, and leave less of the U.S. family budget for spending on domestic goods and services. This could squeeze marginalized homeowners and investors, leading to further concentration of absentee ownership of housing and commercial property in the U.S., along with buyouts of distressed real estate owners in other countries faced with soaring heating and energy costs. But that is deemed collateral damage by the post-industrial blob. Food prices also will rise, headed by wheat. Russia and Ukraine account for 25% of world wheat exports. This will squeeze many Near Eastern and Global South food deficit countries, worsening their balance of payments and threatening foreign debt defaults. My only caveat to Hudson's excellent analysis is that the buyouts of distressed real estate owners is just fuel for the fire, not collateral damage, but I'm sure there was some sarcasm he was using in there too. And now let's look at Seymour Hirsch and his analysis of the motives and how this ties in, because Hudson's article would have been written a month before the bombs were placed and 7 months before they were detonated. Hirsch writes, "From its earliest days, Nord Stream 1 was seen by Washington and its anti-Russian NATO partners as a threat to Western dominance. The holding company behind it, Nord Stream AG, was incorporated in Switzerland in 2005 in partnership with Gazprom, a publicly traded Russian company producing enormous profits for shareholders, which is dominated by oligarchs known to be in the thrall of Putin. Gazprom controlled 51% of the company, with 4 European energy firms, 1 in France, 1 in the Netherlands, and 2 in Germany, sharing the remaining 49% of stock, and having the right to control downstream sales of the inexpensive natural gas to local distributors in Germany and Western Europe. Gazprom's profits were shared with the Russian government, and state gas and oil revenues were estimated in some years to amount to as much as 45% of Russia's annual budget. America's political fears were real. Putin would now have an additional and much-needed major source of income, and Germany and the rest of Western Europe would become addicted to low-cost natural gas supplied by Russia, while diminishing European reliance on America. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Many Germans saw Nord Stream 1 as part of the deliverance of former Chancellor Willy Brandt's famous Ostpolitik theory, which would enable post-war Germany to rehabilitate itself and other European nations destroyed in World War II by, among other initiatives, utilizing cheap Russian gas to fuel a prosperous Western European market and trading economy. Nord Stream 1 was dangerous enough in the view of NATO and Washington, but Nord Stream 2, whose construction was completed in September of 2021, would, if approved by German regulators, double the amount of cheap gas that would be available to Germany and Western Europe. The second pipeline also would provide enough gas for more than 50% of Germany's annual consumption. Tensions were constantly escalating between Russia and NATO, backed by the aggressive foreign policy of the Biden administration. I differ from Hirsch in 2 points. One, that the Russian oligarchs were in the thrall of Putin, and 2, that America's political fears were real. Actually, Putin was in the thrall of the Russian oligarchs, and the U.S. did him the favor of freezing their assets overseas, which meant that he could be able to confront the petrodollar and the SWIFT system and make the changes that his economic advisor, Sergei Glazyev, had recommended. So really, we allowed him to no longer be held captive by those oligarchs. And then, who is this America that is so afraid of a thriving economy and trade balance with Germany and Russia? That's not me. Is that you? So actually, Hirsch then confirms that the U.S. government is exactly what Michael Hudson had talked about, where politicians are beholden to their donors, not to their constituents. He writes, opposition to Nord Stream 2 flared on the eve of the Biden inauguration in January 2021, when Senate Republicans led by Ted Cruz of Texas repeatedly raised the political threat of cheap Russian natural gas during the confirmation hearing of Blinken as Secretary of State. By then, a unified Senate had successfully passed a law that, as Cruz told Blinken, halted the pipeline in its tracks. There would be enormous political and economic pressure from the German government, then headed by Angela Merkel, to get the second pipeline online. Would Biden stand up to the Germans? Blinken said yes, but added that he had not discussed specifics of the incoming president's views. I know his strong conviction that this is a bad idea, the Nord Stream 2, he said. I know that he would have us use every persuasive tool that we have to convince our friends and partners, including Germany, not to move forward with it. A few months later, as the construction of the second pipeline neared completion, Biden blinked. That May, in a stunning turnaround, the administration waived sanctions against Nord Stream AG, with a State Department official conceding that trying to stop the pipeline through sanctions and diplomacy had always been a long shot. Behind the scenes, administration officials repeatedly urged Ukrainian President Zelensky, by then facing a threat of Russian invasion, not to criticize the move. There were immediate consequences. Senate Republicans, led by Cruz, announced an immediate blockade of all of Biden's foreign policy nominees and delayed passage of the annual defense bill for months, deep into the fall. Politico later depicted Biden's turnaround on the second Russian pipeline as the one decision, arguably more than the chaotic military withdrawal from Afghanistan, that has imperiled Biden's agenda. So essentially, Biden was held hostage by the Senate that had already passed a bill unanimously that stopped the political threat of Russian oil going to Germany in its tracks. That alone to me is shocking, that we publicly are preventing that kind of trade and economic benefit to other countries. And then Biden goes them one better and decides to blow up Nord Stream 1 and 2 with the assistance of the Norwegian Navy. And what will be the fallout of this? I predict a future in which Germany will no longer tolerate being a part of NATO, buying U.S. oil and gas, sending weapons to Ukraine, or maybe even being part of the EU with that traitor Norway. I think that Russia is going to repair this pipeline, and that the alliance that perhaps Churchill started a world war or provoked it in order to prevent between Germany and Russia is going to be destiny. And what of us in the U.S.? Biden may have pulled the trigger, but the entire Senate and perhaps the House put him up to it in no uncertain terms. Even if there was a world court that could convict a politician, it can't indict an entire government. Only we can do that. But what they can do is turn the tables on the sanctions. That if you have a castle that has a 12,000-mile moat on one side and 4,000 miles on the other, you don't try to attack it militarily. What you do is you place it under siege. So that's where I think we could get pretty cold and lonely and isolated here in our little castle. Let us eat cake. So knowing now, if you didn't before, that there is nothing they wouldn't do if they could, how are we to look at this bomb train that has just devastated East Palestine, Ohio? Or what about the bomb cyclone that has pummeled an area for a month known for its droughts with unforeseen ocean surges? Or lightning strikes that cause multiple forest fires in one night that have never seen lightning before or since? Are these neglect? Are they accident? Or are they intent? But let's not part ways with this downer. Let's talk about the excellent movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which on one level is about the relationship between a Chinese mother and her daughter, and on another is about overlapping universes with outrageous costumes and stunning martial arts, slapstick comedy, and deep metaphysical questions about good and evil. And of course, it's about the bagel of doom, the black hole that happens when you put everything on a bagel, which looks eerily similar to the donut of doom that the Nord Stream pipeline exhibited when being blown up. I can't convey the multi-dimensional intensity of the jam-packed scenes, not recommended for anyone who gets overstimulated. But everything changes at this turning point when the husband gives this impassioned speech, which says, "Everybody, we just need to be kind. Please, we need to be kind." And when the wife adopts that as her fighting technique, everything changes. All the villains and thugs turn human. There are scenes in the real and the surreal universe of people talking and dancing and laughing and chasing pet raccoons and rescuing them, and rocks that throw themselves down cliffs after other rocks. It ends up being something that turns the bagel of nihilism that the daughter is drawn towards, and that the mother is able to save her from that desire to end everything. And so my question for you is, what if it's true? What if the salvation of multiple universes all rest on you healing just one relationship? Isn't it worth a try? Although I am tempted to follow this with videos about love, we owe it to the Russian and German and Ukrainian people who are facing that black bagel of doom to look more closely at it. So here are the two Michael Hudson videos that I had referred to, the Putin's Peace, Petrodollar Pain, and also Theodicy, Hegemony, and Michael Hudson on Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and please check out the Substack where it will have links to the original articles and also the full quotes. Thank you.